Time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from California's 29th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for having this important hearing. For some people, radio, specifically AM radio, is an outdated medium with a shrinking consumer base. However, in Latino communities, like the one I represent in the San Fernando Valley, radio is one of the most powerful and far-reaching forms of media. In November of last year, Nielsen Media Research reported that 97% of Latinos over the age of 18 listen to radio in some form every month. This phenomenon is not unique only to the Latino community. Racial and ethnic minorities in my state and across this country turn to radio for content that is more inclusive of their stories, their culture, and their experiences and their languages. Mr. Chapman, I know my colleagues have asked about this because it's an important issue. Can you speak further to what factors allow AM radio to target underserved minority communities more effectively than other broadcast mediums, and whether or not radio is in one or more languages in America?
Congressman, thank you for the question. An oftentimes overlooked aspect of diversity and voice is the access to entry. And what I'm talking about is the price of a radio station. So AM radio stations are typically much less expensive today than FM radio stations. What that means is somebody wanting to break into our industry that has a desire to speak to a specific community, a voice or a community of color, has the opportunity to get into broadcast ownership where it might be much more difficult with a large general market signal. So that's a very important aspect of how they talk to the community that they're targeting. While it's often overlooked, that relationship ultimately, as you referenced, the high percentage in the Latino community of listening to the station, it is very similar, which also occurs in the African American community. Stations that have a diverse listener base oftentimes have the strongest listener base because of the relationship with that community.
So cultural competency and ownership does, in fact, create an environment where the business stands a higher likelihood of reaching more people, therefore being more successful?
Absolutely. I can tell you by experience, when I was general sales manager of WTLC AM in Indianapolis, if we did not have a message on the air relating to a particular situation, our audience base oftentimes would doubt that it actually was existing or taking place. That relationship, again, is central.
Okay. So despite recent improvements, the number of minority-owned commercial broadcast stations still lags significantly behind their representational share of the U.S. population. Mr. Chapman, as somebody with experience in purchasing and operating radio stations, I'm wondering if you might have some thoughts or initiatives Congress can take to encourage others to follow your path and expand the number of minority-owned commercial radio stations across the country.
All right. Thank you for the question, Congressman. Our industry is at the best when we're reflective of the communities where we operate. There is an unspoken charge that the radio stations need to speak to the people that are available in the community. And a number of years ago, there was the tax certificate that was available for diverse groups. As broadcasters, we would welcome to see that type of thing in place once again, because we know the more that we have a citizenry that is informed of the issues that are taking place, it's the best way to guide people through tough times.
Yes, it's very important because you mentioned earlier what it takes to enter into that industry, that business. There are some barriers. We mourn the loss of somebody who owned radio stations, television stations, who got his opportunity in the early 1970s when the FCC actually said, you know, let's see if we can entice minorities to go ahead and get involved in ownership. And that was Walter Ulloa out of Los Angeles. Grew up in a poor side of town, but ended up doing very, very well and brought a tremendous cultural competency to every station that he was a part of. And therefore was incredibly successful. So one of the things that I'd like to see happen, and we don't have enough time today, is to see some of your recommendations forwarded to this committee, examples of the past where we've been successful in getting more participation, and then also maybe some innovative things we could do going forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida's 2nd District for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Latta. As we've all heard today, AM radio continues to be important. It offers a broad range of programming, and essential emergency announcements are transmitted classically on the AM bands. Given the long wavelength of AM radio, we can hear from stations hundreds of miles away, which makes this an ideal form of communications in emergencies. I'm aware that technology innovations bring changes to the status quo, and we now have FM and satellite radio and internet, et cetera, but when the prominent lines of communications fail, when individuals can't access the internet, or when there's a natural disaster, AM radio is the last resort. For the life of me, I'm not sure why we're discussing getting rid of that at this particular juncture. I have a few questions for you. Colonel DeMace, thank you for your time with the panel today. With your background as a Deputy Director of Emergency Management and many previous roles in this field, I think you know the importance of effective communications during emergencies. And Mr. Chapman, your experience in broadcasting is certainly germane as well. In the Florida Panhandle, we suffered a Category 5 hurricane that seriously impacted our lives and our communications. We literally lost all cell phones, landlines, internet, and even our police radio repeaters for nearly 2 weeks. What we didn't lose was AM radio. So with the potential removal of AM radios from most of the major automobile manufacturers, do you think FEMA will be able to communicate effectively with individuals during disasters?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As you mentioned, the redundancy that we have built within the integrated public alert and warning system relies upon the AM radio as its most reliable form of communication during those critical moments when those high winds and other factors can destroy the actual cellular infrastructure or other means of communication with which we have to communicate with the public during a crisis. So I think FEMA recognizes
They recognize the
have
importance.
that it's incredibly important to touch.
Mr. Chapman, same question.
Congressman, thank you. I believe that there's all kinds of redundancies that are built into the EAS system. That's why it works well. But for the reasons that we've pointed out, AM sits at the very beginning of the chain. The AM stations are far superior to the other mechanisms in the emergency alert system to start it. It's why we chose for 75% of the primary entry point stations to be AM radio stations.
That sounds like strong affirmation. And Mr. Schmidt, do you have a feeling how much it costs to put an AM radio in a car?
No, I don't have an actual cost for an AM radio. Again, it probably varies between individual manufacturers, and those are proprietary and closely held. But again, we are committed to providing the alerts across the full spectrum of the IPAWS system, and we also provide just a vast offer of choices for our manufacturers. And oh, by the way, there's still 99% of vehicles on the road today that have AM radio. So we will have AM radio for quite a while as we look at the future and see what makes sense in terms of the IPAWS system and FEMA's approach. Thank you.
So I guess I'll close on this note. There are 82 million Americans listening to AM radio, and there are 2 million Americans driving electric vehicles. I think it's a pretty obvious thing to leave the AM radios alone. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, AM radio may seem arcane to some. We've already seen in this hearing it currently serves as the backbone of our nation's emergency alert system, providing an important backstop in times of need, and has proven its continued reliability as other networks fail. which is why the announcement by some automakers to remove AM radio from cars has raised significant concerns for Americans. There are valid questions regarding the overall reach of various forms of emergency communications, the depth of information provided by those alerts, free access to alerts, and the resiliency of the infrastructure required to provide these alerts. It is crucial we ensure that all Americans can freely access life-saving information in times of need through interrelated, innovative, and overlapping forms of emergency communication systems. But at the same time, we can't ignore stymied technological innovation. Let me start with you, Mr. Schmidt. In your testimony, you mentioned that the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System Program Management Office emphasized in its strategic plan for fiscal year 22-26 difficulties of moving away from radio and broadcast as the primary channels for news and information. In your estimation, if we had an emergency right now, during this very hearing, would you say that the current IPAWS system is fully equipped to serve and reach every American in times of emergency without assistance from AM radio? Yes or no?
I can't opine on.
Yes or no, please.
Madam Chairman, Congresswoman Dingell. No, I do not have the ability to answer that question because I am not FEMA. I am not the government. I am not the one that developed the program. We are the ones that work with that program to try to support it the best we can.
Well, I have talked to them. And the fact of the matter is, based on my conversations, that we are not currently adequately prepared to reach all Americans in the event of a disaster without the assistance of AM radio services as a backdrop. I'm grateful that all the members of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation have committed to providing multiple channels of free emergency alert access to consumers. But we need to get far more specific about how they receive these alerts. Mr. Schmidt, can you share with us through what medium consumers can expect to receive free emergency alerts in automobiles moving forward? Is it digital, analog, FM, AM, satellite, or another technology? And are the companies approaching the issue differently?
Thank you for the question. Yes, with respect to free, that varies between mediums and even within mediums. So I can't comment.
So that's a very basic question.
However, what I will say is there are certainly, for example, satellite, where satellite has their free Barker channel, which is always there and runs and is without subscription. And there are a lot of the analog C and other mechanisms which are free as well.
So, Mr. Chairman, I am going to suggest, for instance, by the way, Tesla does not offer AM now in its vehicles. I believe that this committee should ask every manufacturer whether they're going to, how long, what the commitment is, how much it's going to cost, is it going to be streamed, and when they say it's going to be free, what's the definition of free? Now, Mr. Schmidt, how have your member companies also ensured that this medium remains resilient in times of crisis or when wireless network outages occur?
Well, again, like I said, IPAWS is a network of stuff. So depending on the specific event, certain mediums are maybe more appropriate than others. And that's why there's...
But not everybody may have access because everybody's not telling us exactly how they're going to make sure they have access to those free. Mr. Schmidt, will these emergency alert services come standard in all new vehicles? Is this commitment the same across all member companies, or will there be differences in terms of what emergency communication services they will receive in their new vehicles?
Well, I can't comment on individual manufacturers on what exactly is in their program, but there is a commitment that there will be at least some free emergency alert received through those vehicles.
But we don't know whether it's going to be ongoing. I'm going to clearly say consumers should not bear the cost of receiving life-saving emergency information, period. I think it's important that every member company you represent be unambiguously clear about how consumers will receive these alerts free of charge and standard in new vehicles. I have other questions I'd like to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. Listen, I come to this meeting a huge fan of AM radio. I remember in the 1980s, I'll date myself, I used to travel in Colorado, and I could tune in to the Salt Lake City AM radio station and listen to local football games and local news. And of course, I, like many of my colleagues here, want to make sure that AM radio is vibrant and is viable for many years into the future. But if I'm honest, I'm a little conflicted with the concept of the federal government mandating how that is done. And so I come to this hearing with an open mind, not with a predetermined judgment, but just simply an open mind. Some of those memories also include 8-track tapes, cigarette lighters, manual windows. And I find myself asking, gosh, you know, if the 8-track tape industry had lobbied for a mandate to keep 8-track tapes, would we still be listening to 8-track tapes? And I don't think so. So, Mr. Chapman, let's agree that the vibrancy of AM radio is important for entertainment, for education, and clearly, as we've heard today, for emergency situations. But as I travel my district, and I would challenge anybody to have a more rural district than I have in Utah, as a matter of fact, half of my district is actually frontier, I have more success streaming than I do actually getting AM radio signals. And I'm just wondering, if we set aside this concept about cars for just a minute, isn't the vibrancy of AM radio really contingent on a transition to streaming? And should we be having more conversations, right, about how to do that? Look, when I'm here in Washington, D.C., I like to listen to that same local AM station. When I jog on the mall, I can listen to news back home. And I don't really care about even an emergency warning here in D.C. I would care about one back more in my district. So could you just explore with me, like, the future of AM radio? And if we all agree we want to keep it vibrant, shouldn't we be spending more time talking about transitioning to kind of a new world?
Congressman, I appreciate the question. I think it's a fair question. One of the things, we all come with preconceived notions, and one of those is when you reference 8-track tapes from many years ago, I'm part of the generation that grew up with that. And when I listen to AM radio today, I hear static, and it doesn't sound with the same fidelity that FM radio sounds. But for the reasons I pointed out earlier, there are clear superior advantages for AM radio in times of emergency. And so I also recognize that we've discussed that at length this morning. But I think that safety point is...
So I guess my point is there's far higher likelihood that I will hear that outside of my car than inside my car. I don't have a car here in D.C. Some of my staff doesn't have a car. And yet, if we explore ways for people to access AM radio, aren't we actually ensuring far more likelihood that they would get those alerts if we're making sure that everybody can access AM radio really almost no matter where they are with today's technology? By the way, during the hearing, my staff prompted me, and I just looked on Amazon. You can buy an AM radio for about $5. So those of you who want to know what it costs to add it to a car, right. So this is not a cost issue, right? It maybe is a technology issue and where we're going in the future issue. Yeah, I'll give you a chance to respond, and I want to ask a couple more questions.
Congressman, one last point. It was back in January. We were moving our daughter from Denver up to Seattle, and so we drove through large sections of Utah. You know, in our 2013 Toyota Avalon, it's a hybrid, and I can listen to AM radio in that car through that stretch. And there were times where there was not an FM station, and there were times when there weren't AM stations, and they both complement each other in some of those more rural
areas. I agree.
areas.
And just for time, I'm going to move on. I would tell you, though, I can better access that AM streaming in my car in rural Utah than I can frequently with stations. Colonel, that cigarette lighter in my parents' car was often used to start campfires and could be considered essential for emergencies. Maybe only in rural Utah, right? So in your view, like, are we looking at this through the wrong paradigm? Should we be looking at new technology? And here again, not to diminish AM. I want AM to be part of whatever our solution is. But what role should we be looking to new technology and its advancements and not get stuck in a paradigm that it has to be a traditional AM radio as we think about it?
Congressman, great question. No, I think we're always
I got to get a super quick answer because we're almost out of time.
exploring new technologies. I agree with you 100%. But right now, it's currently constituted an emergency situation. The AM platform is critical to communicate.
Okay, and I don't dispute that. It's not the AM platform. It's that thing that is our paradigm that has to be look and feel and act like an old AM radio that I'm questioning. I'm sorry, I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman.